So welcome to Prose Unit 1.2, where we discuss one of my favorite stories, A Good Man is Hard to Find. Before we introduce the story, we're going to talk a little bit more about our favorite subject, death. This time around we're going to talk about what death can mean as the symbol itself. Instead of things symbolizing death, what does it mean when death is literally present in the story? What is the author suggesting or saying to us? On top of that, what about things that lead to death? What about things that are death-like? Are they also important and symbolically functional? Of course they are. For instance, something that is sick or someone who is sick may suggest, as they are dying, that their ideas are also withered and wearying and fading away. Likewise, aging. If you're very old and decrepit within a story, you may symbolize a series of outdated ideas that are past their prime and in the process of going away. This will be the case in today's story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, wherein we have a character called the grandmother. Flannery O'Connor is a Southern neo-Gothic writer. The Gothic tradition, which we associate with texts like Wuthering Heights and Frankenstein and Dracula, is a tradition in which great manors and castles are on display. Unexplained events happen at night. Things are sort of dark and stormy. Heroes are mysterious and brooding. Damsels are in distress. All the sort of classic romantic tropes that you probably would recognize if you were to write your own silly Gothic-style tale. Southern neo-Gothic literature echoes many of these same ideas, only now the castles are plantations and huge manor houses, and in their own way, much like the castles of the Gothic horror stories, these are haunted places. We don't have to be American history scholars to recognize that the South is built on a legacy of slavery, that the plantations that these people occupy were once worked by slaves, and that there is a sort of broken history to the South that leads to sort of a great inequality still present within the South, not just between race. In some cases, it's the former plantation owners who, clinging to ideas of the past, still hope to make good on their land in a way that is no longer possible or viable. When slavery is taken away, the possibility of making money off of your plantation obviously becomes a much more difficult thing. You need people to work your fields. Suddenly you have to pay them when you didn't previously. It can become a corruptive and bankrupting experience for many. And so the notion of the empty, abandoned plantations across the South creates a very good Gothic image. But let's not be too negative towards the South. Another one of the elements that we associate with the South is the notion of Southern hospitality, that idealized vision of being offered a glass of lemonade while you're sitting on someone's front porch swinging. Personally, I can't help but picture Colonel Sanders anytime I think of Southern hospitality. I guess that's my own problem. With that notion of Southern hospitality, though, comes a whole system of complicated Southern mores, the idea of being nice and being kind, but at the same time probably still having issues and the same normal social conflicts and disagreements that you would have anywhere. Flannery O'Connor suggests that her works are all about manners and mystery. This is a direct quote from an essay about her own writing. For her, her texts are about manners in that they are works of social satire, social comedies in the same vein as Oscar Wilde and Jane Austen. They will lampoon and parody characters who would be, at one point in the past, successful Southern belles or matriarchs of plantations who have now fallen into disrepair. But the other side of her story, the mystery, is religion. Flannery O'Connor was a very religious writer. You can visit her home in Savannah, Georgia, and directly across the street from her home is a huge church. And they will tell you stories there of how she was a precocious child who went and questioned the pastors at her church and read the Bible more than almost any of the members of the congregation there had. And her Catholicism is deeply a part of her writing, that she feels that there is a broken element to the human character that has to be repaired. Now, this is not to say that she believes or uses in her writing some divine intervention, a godly figure or an angel walking down to correct the behaviors of others. Not even close. She does, however, believe in moments of reckoning, moments that give characters religious-like epiphanies. However, as a modern writer, she does this in her own very dark, sort of frightening way. She likes to use violence to get characters to their moments of awakening. Where this becomes really interesting for us is in the idea that biblically, characters who lead to epiphany, the character who guides people to their salvation, is Jesus. So, in A Good Man is Hard to Find, you need to look for a character who is Jesus-like. He needs to speak in proverbial wisdoms. He needs to have followers. He needs to be misunderstood and perhaps even considered criminal by his society. And most importantly, he needs to have the ability to bring a fallen sinner into the grace of God in some way before the story's end. And this absolutely happens in A Good Man is Hard to Find, in a very strange way. A Good Man is Hard to Find plays with two recurring religious themes in literature. The first is the loss of innocence, or the fall of man, the idea that introduced to sin, man becomes something different, a changed element that is not holy, not sacred, and incapable of preventing itself from sinning. But the twin side to this, and the important side if you're a religious person, is the hope for redemption, that no matter how fallen, no matter how sinful, a person can, through the right works and the right means and the right belief system, find redemption, become human and whole once again, can restore their soul to a state of purity. How Flannery O'Connor accomplishes this is what makes her a memorable modernist writer. On a technical side, the terms that we're going to look at and explore today are characterization. Characterization is, of course, the process of creating a character, meaning who are these people, what has the author chosen to tell us about them. And keep in mind, it is, again, the author choosing to tell us certain things about the characters, making them mean certain things based on their choices of detail. Direct characterization, which happens a little bit less frequently in good writing, is when the narrator tells us specifically something about the character. This would be generally unambiguous. It might be something along the lines of, Tom had trouble telling the truth. Well, okay, Tom has trouble telling the truth. We don't have to think very hard about that. Now, the author told it to us for a reason, and we need to think about, obviously, what it means about Tom and what it means about everything else that we know of Tom. But direct characterization, a third-person omniscient narrator has told us that Tom has trouble telling the truth. There's no reason to doubt that. Indirect characterization is a little more subtle and happens a lot more in literature, and it's something that we have to learn to read well. That instead of saying, Tom had trouble telling the truth, we say something more like, once again, Tom found himself telling little white lies about his history to make himself sound a little more interesting to the girls in his class. This detail doesn't tell us that Tom is a liar, specifically. It just says that he has a pattern, has a history of trying to impress people by prevarication. Indirect characterization can happen through the actions of a character, through dialogue of that character, or of another character about that character. And indirect characterization also needs to be taken with a grain of salt. If a character says something about Tom, but the character doing the saying isn't a trustworthy character, then maybe we're supposed to believe the opposite of Tom. So as you're reading, look for the characterization, particularly of the grandmother and the misfit, who are our two most important characters in this story. What is it that Flannery O'Connor is telling us about them? What kind of people are they? Read the story, certainly discuss it a little bit with other people in your nearby vicinity, but you are to answer the questions following it on your own, and you need to use textual support. This means that for every question, I want you to quote something from the text, if at all possible. Good luck. If you've stuck around here to after the credits,
You might still be asking yourself, didn't Mr. Wu say there was a Christ-like figure in A Good Man Is Hard to Find? Who was that? Well, let's consider some of the characters and think. We have a guy called the Misfit. He is a larger-than-life figure of renown. Everybody knows his name, knows who he is. He has followers. He appears indigent. Nevertheless, he speaks profound wisdoms about morality, saying things of the grandmother like, she would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life, or it's no real pleasure in life. We may not agree with these profound wisdoms, but he certainly sees them as profound wisdoms. And most importantly, through interaction with a fallen sinner, with a wanton, he brings the grandmother to an epiphany. She says, as she's about to get shot, "Why, you're one of my babies, you're one of my own children." Then she is shot, and she is described as having her legs crossed under her like a child's, and her face smiling up at the cloudless sky. She is returned to a state of innocence as she gazes up at heaven. Troubling, huh? Wait till you read her other stories.